Whoa. Mike Muse is an industrial engineer, a music executive, a political architect. He breaks down the intersection of politics and pop culture. This is the Mike Muse Show.
What's up, world? It's your boy, Mike Muse. Welcome to another episode of the Mike Muse Show. I am so excited to be in conversation with my next guest. I mean, the building is buzzing when they found out that I was going to be interviewing this dynamic superstar of a talent, Michelle O'Grady. I know you're super jealous right now. Shout out to Serge. Serge is even more jealous of me right now. Ladies and gentlemen, this person doesn't need much of an introduction, but for those of you who may not be aware, Teresa Ruiz, who is starring in the next season of Netflix, NARCOS Mexico, is joining me in studio right now on the Mike Muse Show. What is happening, Teresa?
Hola.
Hola, ¿cómo estás?
Hola.
Sí. Now, Teresa, that's the extent of my Spanish.
Okay.
I took French.
Can you count? 1, 2, 3, 4. No.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
5, 6.
5, 6. And my favorite, though, is nueve.
9.
You know what I mean?
Oh, we didn't get to 9. Okay.
I love nueve. Yeah. It's something about the way that sounds. But I have two friends of mine that we love to say mira.
Mira.
I know it means look,
Yeah.
but we attribute it as if it's like a person. It's almost we're always like, Mira. What's up, Mira?
Oh, okay.
Super weird, super strange.
Okay.
But that is what we do. But welcome. You are an incredible talent.
Thank
You are a superstar in your own regard. Talk to us about just the energy you're feeling just around you yourself, right? We're going to get into the character. We're going to get into Narcos Mexico. Don't worry, Netflix. We're going to do a great job of promoting it. But just around you, how are you feeling about the buzz? People really have your back out here. People are really wanting you to win. And when I told people I was going to be doing this, people was like, yo, no way. So how does that make you feel?
I feel, ever since last season, I was nervous last season before it premiered because I didn't know if people were going to understand this character that I had created because, I was like threading the needle so carefully on it.
Yeah.
And I thought no one's gonna notice, all they're gonna see is this like women in the little dresses with the, with all the sex appeal, which is an aspect of her. But then as soon as it came out, I was so moved by how people really got like the heart of this character and then related it to me.
Yeah.
So then all the people that say hi to me or that, follow what I do in my work are very incredibly kind.
Wow.
And they're very warm. And like you said, like it's like they're rooting for me. And it really feels that way. Like the same way they root for Isabella, it's like they're rooting for me. And I just I want to cry.
Yeah. Well, talk to us about it, 'cause I find that interesting. And my audience knows I don't have any prepared questions at all. I only have my laptop open just so I can make sure I'm good with pronunciations because, again, I didn't take Spanish growing up. But most individuals like to separate themselves from the character, right? But you're kind of leaning into not only is the similarities, but the juxtaposition of it. Talk to us about how you feel so tied to that character and how it represents you in real life, because that goes to women, the women's movement, women's empowerment, and then really the nuance that women have to go through in all facets of life.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really believe that you could separate yourself from any character you play because each character, at least in my experience or the way that I work, perhaps, it's like these characters will wake up a certain aspect of yourself, and those aspects, might be little, very little, but like when I started working on Isabella, it was like I'd be angry about this dynamics, and then those things would make me question ways in which I had, acted in the past or things that had happened to me, and it was really. It was really intense. The first season, the second season was even more intense because in the second season she's fighting for her turf, and that's exactly how I felt on set because, like you say, like talking about women issues and what we're going through and what we want, especially right now at this time. That I just so happened to be working as well. Like years before, I was younger. I wasn't in the professional world, and we'd get the episodes and it was written mainly by men. So, I'd read it, I'd be like, well, this is cool, but Let me tell you.
I love it. I love it.
So it was me like pushing through this season, and that's what Isabella's doing in the second season too.
Yo, I'm audience, if you're listening to us in your cars, in your trucks, or in your office right now, and you can't watch us right now on video, I am smiling because, Teresa, you're really highlighting something that it's really important for me, right? Because a lot of times, yes, this character in this series is based on criminality. And a lot of times we look at criminals, and I'm just going to just define that for conversation purposes,
yes.
right? And just to be super general, as those others existing over there, right? There's always a blame assigned to them. It's almost, it's their own agency. They're the reason they got into the fault that they're in. So we don't really care about the outcomes of their lives, nor do we care, especially when we think about criminal justice reform, to understand how they got in a position that they are in. But what you're doing, and something that I do too as well, is to make sure we humanize these individuals, right? No matter if they're based in criminal-based activity, right? Because when you look at them as a human, then you're understanding their constitution and what made them decide to do who they are. And then maybe we can do better reform and create better laws and policies to catch them on the front end, right?
Yeah. Also, because we have to look at the system that we are living in. That's like the main thing. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying by any means that the criminals that we portray in this show are justifiable in any way, because then we're even talking about other issues.
Of course you are, yeah.
Like issues of personality, like that's different.
Yeah.
But what this show does really well is look at the system in which a person can grow to such extent to become this huge drug dealer and do all this incredible misdeeds. You can't do that if the system doesn't allow you to do that. You can't do that if there's not collaboration between
with the government
countries, with the government of both countries.
Of both countries. That's it. High five. We look at this as an isolated issue to Mexico, but we forget about the role that America actually plays in that. But before we even get there, before we cross the border, it even goes to what I was going to lead to is the issue that women face. Right? Because you said something really profound. I love that statement that you said, that in the second season, she's fighting for her territory. She's fighting for her turf in this male-dominated space of the drug cartel, right? And this male-driven role that may or may not have written predominantly by men. I don't know the dynamic of that. But it's interesting when you humanize that element, is that there's a thread of how women are perceived in power. There's a thread about how women are taken in corporate America. There's a thread about how women are perceived in society, in fighting law, in a nonprofit, in the art world, that women are constantly fighting for their space, right? And it doesn't matter about the industry, but I think this goes to a larger issue of our human construct and how we view women.
Yeah, I think a lot of that struggle too, like people, I think right now, because everything that women are talking about is being very misunderstood. Yeah. So people are like, oh, they just want power. They want this power. They just want it. And it's like, yes, but we cannot forget. And I'm not, again, like, I'm just separating.
Of course.
What I build as the core struggle of the human being and not of this drug cartel figure.
Of course.
You know?
Yeah. But again, we're talking to the human aspect of it. This is to no way say that we're supporting the drugs or we're supporting crime. We're not. But what we're really getting at is the human aspect of this, right? And I think that is so overlooked so often in these type of conversations.
Yeah, and I think the core struggle too for power is women want power because they want safety. Because they want safety in the workspace. Because as long as you are undermined, as long as you're not your own boss, then you are going to be sexually harassed. You're going to be discriminated against. Your ideas are going to be stolen from you without a second thought. Yeah. You're going to feel, threatened. Yeah. So this search, this quest for power that we are having as women is got to do first and foremost for safety, for financial independence, for social independence. So if that is a core struggle that we're going through, to me, is no wonder why people identify with Isabella, because they can see it through her and they can relate to it in their workplace.
And it's no different, and you don't have to respond to this, but in my audience, we've talked about this a lot. It's no difference than as we talk about that migration that's happening from Central America coming into the border and to come into the United States. These families, these mothers, these children are leaving their countries of Guatemala and Central America for fear, right? It's a safety issue, right? While they're willing to trek all that way. And there's no difference in this character, Isabella, and the story that is based in Mexico about this drug cartel, about safety, right? Because of the fact that, we have to give context, right? Like this is set like in the 70s, right? Like it is set in a particular time period, 80s, sorry. It is set in a particular time period where drugs were rampant, not only in Mexico, but also to the United States, right? Yeah. The drug cartels was just as equally as powerful as the government, right? Like they're almost like one and the same to a certain extent. And so it's like, how does one have to make that decision of, do I fight this institution, this system that we're talking about? Do I stay away from it, right? And know that I may not be 100% secure, or do I go on the inside and try and fight for safety, financial independence, and do the best I can for myself, my individual agency, and then maybe to my family? Do you think that is the struggle of Isabella? Do you think I contextualize that right, or would you have a different take on that?
I don't think that's the struggle of Isabella Bautista, the character. The character is looking ambitiously to be the biggest drug dealer the world has ever seen. Yeah. And that has other motivations.
Of course.
Which have to do with power, ambition, and she has her own spiral, something that will spiral her down in this egocentric quest for money. And that is a total different thing. Yeah. Yeah, what I was saying about safety is just about women in the workplace and where the struggle begins for a woman to look for power.
Yeah. What defines that in your Constitution, right? Like that female identity, right? And to want to recognize that and bring back to the forefront, right? Is that lived experiences? Does that come from family dynamics? Is that seeing your mother in conflict with that and fighting for voice and fighting for power?
I think I'm the first actor in my family, in both sides, mother and father. I'm the first person was to go into the arts, and I started really early, at least studying. So to not come from anywhere or to not have any kind of anybody that could have guided me, I think that has taught me in that way to kind of be like Isabella, and kind of like look and try to see how I can do this, how I can do that. And then I encounter, because I'm also a woman of color, I encounter a lot of resistance, a lot of no's, a lot of shut doors, and I open them.
Yay! Come on now,
because I'm from Mexico.
Yeah, that is awesome.
So I think that's where it's connected.
Yeah. But talk to us a little bit about that though as well, like because there's an indigenous part of you too as well that is very prideful for you, and I know we talked about it and we practiced the word. I know the Z is silent. Well, it's an S. It's a silent Z. Zapato. Zapoteca.
You just said shoe.
Oh my God.
You said zapato.
Oh, I don't want to say shoe at all. Look, je ne sais pas.
Zapoteca, sí. My mother is Zapotec indigenous, and my grandparents were Zapotec indigenous.
Talk to us a little bit about that identity within Mexico, right? Of like the indigenous community of Mexico versus those who are not of indigenous roots within Mexico, right? Is there a dynamic? Is there a conflict that exists within those two worlds? Is it equal? Talk to us a little bit about that for those who may not be familiar.
Well, all the indigenous communities are the original communities of Mexico, are the original citizens of the country. And right now, Mexico is incredibly divided by racism. And racism starts with the color of your skin and your facial features. Because you can be of lighter skin but still have the feature. It's all
Colorism.
Colorism, yeah. And but you see, because I grew up in America, in the U.S. and in Mexico, I'm very surprised at how evolved the conversation is here in the U.S. We have words like colorism, like intersectionality. We have words that help us define the struggle and overcome it. In Mexico, we don't have that. So the more you don't have words to help you express what you're going through, the less that you can even identify or believe it exists. And then you blame yourself, and then you feel worthless, and then you have all these things that push you down, which is, I believe, the main the main punishment of colorism and racism, to not be able to go through and achieve your dreams and live a fulfilling life.
Teresa, I see why people are excited for you and want you to win. Like, you're brilliant. Like, the context you bring to conversations and discourse is very impressive because you're nailing it. You know, I often talk about, in some circles of my friends of mine, about language, right? And the importance of language, right? And not language in the sense of how we talk to one another, but just words, right? To describe scenarios, to be most effective. Yeah. Teresa, I talk a lot about, I grew up in a very Black Baptist church, and there was a saying growing up that said, I'm so thankful I woke up in my right frame of mind. And as a kid, I never really understood what that meant. But to your point, now that there is more words and we're more evolved as a society, I began to understand that as, the elders saw their friends who maybe not were in their right frame of mind, but we didn't have the language of dementia. We didn't have the language of Alzheimer's to really discuss that was what was going on. We just looked at it as our right frame of mind, right? And so then if you don't have the language, if you don't have the context of it, then you can't detect symptoms of dementia or Alzheimer's in order to either A, try and catch it early, or B, protect and give better care, right? Understanding of it. So it's no different than that Mexico doesn't have that evolved language of words like colorism and intersectionality. Then how can you begin to heal because you can move on in order to treat and have a proper discourse on it, right?
Or even toxic masculinity, like all of these concepts. It's like, what do you mean?
Yeah. Well, talk a little bit more about that and about colorism, and in particular in Mexico, just because as you transition into the media space, right? I was always aware, and I want to get your understanding of it. I dare not be the authority on this at all, is that individuals who were more of a lighter skin or white Mexicans had more opportunity within the media and the film landscape. Talk to us about that. Is that true, what I was hearing? And then do you see that changing in our current state that we are in media and entertainment?
You mean in the U.S.?
More in Mexico, more like South America and Latin America and Latin-speaking countries.
I don't know if it's changing. It's changing for me because I've craved a path through effort, but that's not the...
I love that. We used to fist bump, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who can't see it.
But that's not the majority. You know what I mean? Like, I have incredibly talented friends that are still fighting for an opportunity, but their skin is even darker than mine. So in that sense, because my mother is indigenous, but my father is a whiter Mexican, then I do have a more of an advantage. And it's sad to see that. It's sad to see, and then to see how the color of your skin gives you more acceptance and opens more doors. And I also have a lot of friends that are talented with lighter skin that fight me so much on this, and they're like, well, I've worked really hard. Well, I nobody has given me anything and it's like, yes, but it's not about that. Like, the conversation is not about that. The conversation is about the people who are struggling.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's it, yeah. So it's not about you who come from a privileged space, right?
Yeah, which is great. Yeah. We all celebrate you. This is fantastic. But let's talk about
it doesn't take away your talent, right? You as an individual, but it doesn't negate the fact that whoever hired you were thinking through a different filter and through a different lens.
Yeah, or that the standards of beauty are those.
Yeah.
Or that the people that do not comply with that standard of beauty will have a very, very slim chance to fulfill their dreams and their goals.
Yeah. Dude, I can't not stop smiling right now just because I love this conversation. Like, you're a perfect guest for me, right?
Aww.
Like, you sit at this incredible intersectionality because even the indigenous conversation, right? We don't talk about indigenous nations and indigenous communities and individuals enough. And, recently I attended the Oscars and I was excited in there this year because if you recall, Teresa, the way that individual, he came out and he gave a moment of honor to the indigenous lands that we were sitting on, right?
Yes.
In that theater. He gave acknowledgement to the indigenous communities and the nations that allowed Hollywood to be Hollywood, right? The lots that Hollywood shoots on, right? The studios, right, are of indigenous nations and lands and communities. And I just thought that was just such a moment, right? And look, change is hard. It's hard to change generations of mindsets of discrimination. And it's hard to change centuries of what has happened to the indigenous communities. But the moment that he began to talk about it, to me, it goes to what you were saying earlier about the language, right? As soon as we're able to bring the language of that into a room such as that, and then we have individuals who are talented and brilliant like you who come from that community that are able to help advance that conversation, even if just a little bit, right? A little bit goes so far. And I think people underestimate the power of the microphone, right?
Yes.
The power of that video camera that's
and the power of
recording us.
example too.
And the power of example.
You know, because I think I started to learn about these subjects and about how to speak about them because of my little cousin Andrea. You know, my little cousin, she has even darker skin than mine, and she's younger than me, and she looks up to me. So then I began to see, you know, a little like shame forming in her, and I thought if I could be an example for her of who she could become, the way Selena Quintanilla was for me. You know, and I'm not comparing myself to them in any way,
but
shape, or form.
representation matters.
But what I'm saying, just representation, and just in the family. I'm not even talking about me as a public person. I'm just talking about me in my house interacting with her. You know, if she could see that, I thought a few years ago, then that could lift off of her. You know, through just seeing someone that she could you know, look up to. And that happened. That began to change, and that began to inspire me more to kind of want to learn and kind of want to talk about this subject. And in that sense, I admire the Black community so much because of their organization. Like, to me, that is like mind blowing.
Yo, again, I tell my guests all the time. A lot of times my guests and their agents and their publicists, you know, they're very concerned about what am I going to say, right? And since I don't write questions, I mean, I literally tell them, like, this interview is going to be as good as you are, right? The energy you give me is what's going to be great, right? If you give me no energy, this is going to be an awful interview, right? It literally is up to you because I'm really big on that, right? And energy and the flow. You have really been leading this conversation. You probably even recognize it. I'm just here to help shape it and guide it. And I think that is the role of a fantastic host, is just to help shape the conversation that's coming from your subject that you're interviewing. And to even you here,
I know, we're here to talk about Narcos. And
we're going to clue with Narcos. But no, this is Narcos, though, right?
This is Narcos.
This is Mexico. This is the cartel. This is the drug industry. This is the female in the drug industry, which you're representing. So we talked about Narcos, right? We talked about Narcos Mexico.
Which is streaming now.
But from a very evolved conversation. And we're going to end with all the promotion that we need to make sure Netflix is happy to check all the boxes that they can't understand how much this is really reflecting what Narcos is, right?
Yes.
And what your character really represents. Your character is layered, right? And your character comes from a place,
and it's layered with all those struggles.
It is.
I feel. I mean, I hope.
But that's the importance of film, is for us to be able to take a platform like Netflix, like Narcos Mexico, like a character like Isabella, and be able to have this type of discourse, right? And then you're an actor who represents all these things. But as we conclude, you just said something really interesting. You said that you wanted to learn. You weren't an expert on these subject matters, right? And you wanted to learn the experience. But for me, look at this. I mean, I don't speak Spanish, right? Like, some of these words and terms I wasn't familiar with. Like, your indigenous, you know, part of you I wasn't familiar with, but I still went for it, right? And you can see that. I struggled a little bit, but that's authentic, right? And I believe that we always come from a place that we have to be perfect and experts in order to even broker the conversation. I'm not an expert at any of this, and I still went for it, right? You just got to just go for it. And so...
Yeah, and I think that's what happened also with our generation. We're just trying to find our way around all these issues.
That's it.
You know, we're just trying to find our, like, trying to explain how we're feeling.
Yeah.
And that's it.
So as we conclude, why should people tune in and watch Narcos Mexico, that is streaming now, season 2 on Netflix?
Because the season is incredible. I mean, it's intense. I finished watching it last night.
Good for you.
Yeah, I almost didn't sleep.
Good for you. Why would you? Yeah.
Yeah, but it talks about so many things that people have no idea of telling our history.
Yeah.
You know, where we were and how we got here. And
Yeah.
that's important.
So important. Ladies and gentlemen, if you can tell by this 25, 30-minute conversation we just did on deep dives on indigenous communities, the cartel, Mexico, immigration, women empowerment, identity, safety, security, all that from a show, that's when you know it is an incredible show that you must dig in. Until next time, folks, Teresa Ruiz, thank you for coming on the Mike Muse Show. You have got to come back so we can keep this conversation going.
Thank you.
Can I get you on record saying you're going to come back?
Yes.
Yo,
I'll come back.
folks, stay tuned. We'll be right back. Peace. Mike Muse Show, I am so excited that you have joined us again for another fascinating conversation. I mean, Teresa Ruiz was absolutely amazing just now. I am still thinking about our conversation. I am thinking about the complexities of her character, but really about what her character represents and the complexities of our society, of women and women fighting for their agency and fighting for the security, no matter what industry or sector that you're in. And again, we weren't supporting the criminalization of the drug cartels, but I enjoy humanizing criminality, because it's through the humanization that you get a chance to really to have a discourse and create better policies to prevent them from even going into the system before it begins, once we have an understanding of who they are. And the drug cartels have always been fascinating to me. I mean, I think they're fascinating to you as well. That's why Netflix has created this series called Narcos. And so I wanted to bring in someone from the legal realm who has experience in the drug cartel. And I mean, there is some stories that this young man has that we started talking about it, and I was like, just stop. Just save it for the conversation, save it for the interview. I couldn't wait to get him in. The attorney, the cool, the sophisticated, the smart, the brilliant Lance A. Clark of Bernstein, Clark, and Moskowitz. What's happening, brother?
What's going on, brother? How you doing?
Good.
That was a great introduction. That really makes me feel special.
No, man. Like, I'm special. We are happy that you are here with us to help us really guide us through this wild, fascinating world. I mean, right? There's a reason why we're obsessed with Scarface. There's a reason why we're obsessed with like these mafia movies, right? There's a reason why we're obsessed as a nation with The Wire, right? And there's a reason why we're obsessed with Narcos, right?
Yes.
There is something that gravitates us to like drugs and the drug cartel. Like, why do you think that is, just from like a human nature perspective?
Well, it's sexy, for lack of a better term. You know, people are into, the novelization of it. It's the movie life. Everyone wants to be a part of something that's borderline illegal until they get arrested. Then they realize it's not cool to be part of this illegal thing. But it's, it's the stories, it's the money, it's the fame, it's the cars, it's the women, it's the houses, the things that all Americans aspire to be. And you see how these people do it, and you want to emulate their lives and live their lives, unfortunately.
Now, some of the cases you had, do you see some of the people you're representing or prosecuting, right?
I've never been a prosecutor.
So you've never been a prosecutor?
I've been a defense attorney for about 13 years.
Oh, so you've never been on the prosecution side. So when the clients, and that's even better then, so the clients that you're defending, when you begin to understand their story, right, is it the romanticization that led them to this life of criminality?
It usually starts with a life of poverty, and no one wants to be poor. And in certain, aspects in socioeconomic classes, you don't have the money to go to school. You don't have the means to go to higher education. And frankly, you don't have the mentorship of someone saying, this is how you do it. So, you can, base that on growing up in the inner cities in New York and a bunch of other places. The people you looked up to in the 80s were the drug dealers. Those ones that had the BMWs, those were the ones that had the cars and the minks. And, there were no young brothers that were lawyers in the hood shaking your hand saying you could be a lawyer. Like, I want to be like those dudes. You watch Paid in Full and you watch New Jack City. So it's the same thing.
Nino Brown.
He was
a modern day.
I thought I was G
Robin,
Money when I was growing up.
He was Robin Hood.
Yeah, exactly. And that's all we know. So when you look at that aspect, now take it and put it in the cartel sense, they're growing up poorer than we grew up, because at least, we had a roof over our heads. Some of these guys were living in the street, victims of sex abuse, all types of abuse. And the only way out of it, in their mind, I'm assuming, was getting into the drug game. And it's Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest. A lot of people died on that way to the top. And when you made it to the top, it's because you went through a lot of things to get there.
It's interesting because that's what, if you remember, I was addressing with Teresa, right? Because she was talking about as a female, but she was more talking about just like more of a mental security space, right? And being really secure in her job. But for me, I actually took it to the perspective of, the whole migration pattern right now from Central America, right? Like from Guatemala. And so what you're seeing, those individuals are saying, these mothers and their children, is that we're migrating north for better safety, right? For better opportunity, like for better education. And I think there's something to be said about when you're in those type of environments in Mexico with the drug cartel, you can't separate whether or not they're the government, right, entity, or whether or not they're this drug entity. How do you feel safe, right? And so if you are opting out, are you able, A, to make an income that can support your family, or are you always under the constant threat of violence or being taken advantage of? So then C then is an option just to go on the inside, right, and take your shot on the inside of the cartel.
I mean, you raised a good point when you were speaking about the police in some of these countries. And, you know, I use rap phrases a lot. I think Wu-Tang hit it on the head. Cash rules everything around me.
Yeah.
The money. So these cartel guys are able to buy government, buy policy, and have influence that reaches far beyond your imagination. So when you grow up in that neighborhood and in that environment, no matter how much you don't want to be part of it, you have no choice. That's why you see a lot of these families migrating, because they want a safer life for their kids. But they can stay there and their children are forced to become a gang member.
Yeah.
And then where does that lead to? Either death, imprisonment, or a life that you really don't want.
Yeah.
So that's why you see all these people migrating for a better life to get out of that.
So speaking of migrating, you being on the federal side, right? How then, what is the role of law and U.S. attorneys once the cartel either A, enters over into United States borders? Because Teresa and I were just talking
you
about...
don't have to enter to the border.
Yeah, but that's what I talked to. So I'll say that, you know, Teresa and I were just talking about how it isn't just a Mexico situation, right? It's a Mexico-United States, right? A scenario. So talk to me in the moment you get involved in this conversation and space from a legal perspective.
Well, look at Manuel Noriega. You know, the government got Noriega in Panama and brought him to the country.
Yeah.
So all the government has to do is prove that your conduct affected, you know, interstate commerce in America. So that's why if you're from Mexico and you're importing drugs or exporting drugs into the United States of America, you may have never touched American soil, but your drugs did.
Yeah.
And then the people who bought the drugs did. So then that makes you culpable and liable for that offense.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily have to step foot on this, you know, continent of ours, a country of ours, in order for them to have jurisdiction over you.
Yeah, because as a matter of fact, it's the drugs that have taken place on our soil here in the United States. That's enough for cause.
That you sent the drugs here, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So are you constantly studying the cartels? Are you constantly studying the movement of the cartels? Talk to us about in terms of from your legal practice, like your personal experience when you have touched the cartels and what capacity, like from the legal perspective.
Well, I mean, of course, I can't speak on any
not specific cases, but if you could just talk maybe in general.
You know, there have been cases where the government was looking for people of interest and was able to get them outside of the country. A lot of times it's people coming into the country and they get caught with like boatloads of drugs because the drugs got to get in somehow. And I know we were speaking before about, you know, the Colombia and Mexico thing. So a lot of these drugs are manufactured and made in Colombia, but how you get it to America? It's a long route. So you have to make deals with the Mexican cartels in order to use their routes to then get the drugs from, you know, South America, Central America, through Mexico, and then across the border, whether it's in California, Texas, Arizona, any of these border states, then into the country. So where I come into play is that a lot of these guys, you know, get arrested, and, you know, those are the guys who are either bringing in the drugs or the mules who are sent over here by the cartel to bring the drugs in. And there you go.
Yeah. So so I have a very novice question. I mean, this is a very basic ass question. So then how do you get the call? Like, does the drug cartel call you up for representation? Like, is old Chapo calling you up on your cell phone?
No. That'd be a good story for a movie.
How does that call work?
So, you know, how it works, you know, the cartel has different, you know, hubs across this country where, you know, these guys buy directly from the cartel and then they distribute the drugs throughout the country. So when you're in tune with, you know, as a defense attorney, you know, it's not the cartel head that'll call you, but it's the person who was getting the drugs from the cartel and then distributing it, and then some of his people get caught up, and then you get that call. Now, I've represented cases where, you know, I don't know, tractor trailers were meeting, you know, 20, 30 keys of heroin, millions of dollars in cash. You know, someone set someone up. Next thing you know, DEA is converging, you know, on the scene. And those drugs came from an out-of-country source.
Yeah.
and then just got caught up in New York, in the Southern District of New York.
Yeah. So, so then, I mean, are you? I'm laughing just because I find this so widely fascinating, right? Because I see these these news stories, right?
Yeah.
And it's a camera unveiling, all the keys, that they're like, and all the heroin, right? Is that when you get onto the scene? Like, are you?
Yeah, because once they're arrested, you'll either get a call from the family or from the federal government, because usually in federal cases there are multiple defendants, and the federal defenders are the primary defense source for people charged with federal offenses, but they can't represent more than one defendant because that'd be a conflict of interest. So then you have experienced attorneys like myself and others who are on this panel on the federal bar who the government calls, hey, we need your help, can you take this case? And then you get involved in that way as well. But a lot of these cases that I've seen, they're sending drugs through the mail, through human beings, whether in or strapped on, truckloads, boatloads, just by any means necessary to get it here.
So then what are you defending then in that moment, right? Like, are you looking at a technicality? Are you looking at, like, what is the defense typically of individuals who are involved in this captivity or this capture, if you will?
Well, there's different levels of culpability, meaning if you're the guy on the top and say I threaten you to come into this country and bring these drugs, and if you didn't do it, I'm going to harm your family. Now, granted, you have committed a crime by bringing it in, but what was your motivation for doing it? It doesn't absolve you of the offense, but it is mitigating circumstances that show, all right, this person might not have had the criminality aspect in their mind to be the next Scarface or be the next El Chapo. And a lot of times it's these people of lower means who are doing this thing to survive and under duress because they've been threatened. And a lot of times you can articulate that thought to the U.S. Attorney's Office and to the judge to say, I get it. He had a couple of keys of cocaine on him. This is bad. But you have to look at the totality of the circumstance, and sometimes it's not the what, it's the why. Why did someone do this thing?
I mean, it goes back, Lance, what we're saying earlier in the terms of how individuals have to make a choice when they're over Mexico, right? Or when the drug cartel is a dominant factor in the communities and cities that they live in, right? Do we stay on the side, right, and hope they'll leave us alone, or do we take our chances to go on the inside, for protection, right? And so what I'm hearing from you is that there's so many reasons why individuals opt to participate in this criminality, right? And sometimes it isn't necessarily a choice of theirs, but more so as a force.
You hit the nail on the head. Sometimes the choice is there is no choice. And I remember there was a saying Pablo Escobar used to have, you take the money or the bullet. So either you're going to allow me to pay you off or I'm going to kill you. Now, what choice do you really have? As honorable as a human being as we all want to be, when you're faced with that and you have a family, someone's going to kill your family, someone's going to kill you, your mother, your child, what choice do you really have?
Yeah. So there are a lot of, I'm going to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole and I'm going to back out, right? Are there moments where your defendants are fearful of their life once they are in custody, right? So are there moments and procedures where we're talking about witness protection?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure at that moment, in order for them to use case, they have to essentially turn state's evidence, if you will, right? And
I guess unfortunately there is a bad term, but the majority of the federal government's cases are made from, confidential informants. And of course, there's a risk for your life, especially if you're dealing in a sense of people who have the means to do it. It's one thing someone says, I'm going to kill you. Say what you want to say. But if you don't have the means to do it, it's just empty words. But for the people who have the means to do it, you have to be really, cognizant of that and fearful that these things can occur. So a lot of the people, some of them who are arrested do end up, cooperating with the government. And that could be a death sentence. And then you definitely can't go back home to where you were because a lot of people who are arrested are not here legally. So what happens then? It's a lot to, take into consideration and to navigate through for the safety of the person that is now helping the United States government make their case.
Yeah. So I've always wanted to ask a question to a defense attorney like yourself, or just attorneys period, who are either prosecuting or on the defense side of the drug cartels. Are there ever moments where you guys are concerned about your life and your safety?
one or two times that's happened to me where, and I'm usually an outgoing person, you know, I talk to my clients, here's my cell phone number. When I have dealt with, you know, clientele that had direct access to the higher ups in the cartels, I back off of that because, you know, worst case scenario, something I've watched enough movies, you know, when they kill the informant, they coming for the lawyer too. That was just in Bad Boys 3, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm very cognizant of that. It's a fine line, but the answer to your question is, it's happened sometimes.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on from there. I am curious because I talked about the notion of in Mexico and or Colombia where these cartels exist. There is a fine line between the government and the cartels. Here in the United States of America, and from a government perspective, do you see the cartels engaged in any lobbying efforts or engaged in any policy advocacy efforts? Like, are they that organized and structured when it comes to that?
On the face of it, no, but the honesty, of course, like the money dictates everything. So when you have unlimited amount of resources, you can hire whoever you want to lobby for your interest. It's sort of like how the cartels were against the legalization of marijuana in a lot of these states because their bottom line got affected. And that's why you see a lot of importation of meth and heroin and the drugs that will never be legalized. You know, the harder drugs are now being, you know, pushed into the country more because they're not making as much money off of the marijuana because now the U.S. government is making money off of the marijuana.
So when you're saying that, so do they have lobbying arms? Like, do they have?
I mean, I'm not going to say that the, you know, cartel has a lobbyist that works for them, but they have enough money to have front and shell companies to then have attorneys and lobbyists work for those front and shell companies that are pushing forward their agenda.
Yeah.
So they have lobbyists that are pushing forward an agenda that's favorable to them and their bottom line.
That is fascinating.
It is.
I almost want to say that's breaking news here on the Mike Muse Show. I mean, because of course we talk about, you know, money laundering,
yes.
right? I mean, there's fantastic films on Netflix like Ozark. There is a fantastic film right now with Meryl Streep on the laundromat, and so we look at we're understanding what shell companies are much more, right? We're understanding what laundering money really is, and so, you know, clearly these movies and stories are based on something, but this notion that to hear someone who was actually in this space say that,
well, what do you
there's
do?
ways for it to happen.
I mean, what do you do with $10 million in your closet?
Yeah.
You know, what are you going to do with that? You're not going, you know, to buy a car. This is not the 80s in Miami anymore. So you need a way to, you know, funnel that money into a legitimate business so then you can, you know, file a tax return.
Yeah.
And you can purchase things on a credit card.
Yeah. So now we're in the United States, there is this notion because, you know, cannabis now has become legalized in certain states, in certain ways, in certain perspectives. But let's take the state of California, right? And you know, you talked about ways and routes that the Mexican drug cartel is in collaboration oftentimes with the Colombian cartels in order for the routes to exist to come up through situations like California. You know, the drug cartels are existing in California too as well. As California has become legalized in an aspect of it, do you see a rub, right, whether you're hearing about it on the streets, between the legal space of cannabis versus the drug cartel within these spaces and places, right? Are you starting to see some friction? Like, the drug cartels feel threatened by the legalization of cannabis that is beginning to spread throughout our country?
Yes, but what these cartels are great at is adapting to change, and that's what they did. So a lot of the drugs seized at the border is not marijuana anymore. It's fentanyl, it's heroin, it's you know, these stronger drugs. They just realized, okay, we're not making this much money on the marijuana anymore because the government legalized it. So which is the cause of this opioid crisis as well, because now they're pushing more hard drugs into the country and diverting from the marijuana.
Yeah. This is a fascinating conversation. I just want to let you know that, because I never think about the the drug cartels advancing themselves, right? But when you think about it, it's a very sophisticated operation. So why wouldn't they be advancing themselves,
Exactly,
right?
yes.
And it no longer is the marijuana that is coming through. So now they have to adapt to other narcotics,
Yes.
right? And other systems to make sure that bottom lines are increasing. So you're taking me so many different places. So now I want to go more into like the mindsets of like the drug cartels and like the leaders of the drug cartels, if you will. Are these individuals, are they like individuals who went to like universities? Like, are they college individuals? Do they come from corporate America? Are they tied to corporate America? Or are they just individuals who come from the streets who just rose up in this space and understand adaptability and economics? And I want to be very clear. I don't believe one has to go to college to be smart. So I want to be very clear about that. And I also too believe that there are a lot of just drug dealers who I know and met here in the United States who are brilliant, right, and are well read and well versed. And for me, I believe America is just a matter of fact that we haven't captured them, right, and caught them in order to how to use that mindset that they have that they're using for criminal activity in terms of how to use it for more productive activity, right? So with the drug cartels, like, do you see that too as well? Like, what's a characteristic?
So just to touch on what you said, you know, you don't need a degree to be intelligent. So, you know, higher education is just a way for the elite to stay elite.
Come on now.
Because, you know,
that's a word right there.
Some of the smartest people who we've encountered don't have a degree,
Yeah.
don't have the letters after their name. And sometimes the best lesson in life is experience.
Yeah.
So, you know, go back to your question, a lot of these guys may not have went to a formal education, but you take the formal out, they've had an education for the last 10, 20 years of their lives and learned, you know, this amount of money, it weighs this amount, that's how much it is. They didn't need that scale to the counting machine. They just knew that if you put this on a scale, it measures that this is how much money it is.
Yeah.
And they've been able to navigate through, you know, what they do to become who they are.
Yeah.
You know, Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale. That's fine. That's great. And not to take anything away from them. But there's a brother better than Jordan who never made it to the NBA.
That's very true.
Out there that exists.
That's very true. That's very true. And even, I mean, even for another example, there's so many singers in churches that can outsing any number one platinum charting artist right there on the billboards. When it comes to that, this is so fascinating. But I mean, I know, audience, you keep hearing me say fascinating, but like I am really just enjoying this conversation because these are things that we really don't get a chance to have an honest conversation on, right? And I love the side that you are on the defense side and not the prosecution side, because the prosecution side, we understand almost their purview, right? The prosecution side, and shout out to all the prosecutors out there. Well, not all of you, some of you, right? The job is to prosecute those who are bringing drugs in illegally, and as they should, right? To make sure that our children, our youth don't get addicted on these drugs, and as they should. But from your perspective, you are bringing so many different human interest stories that kind of have an understanding of why this criminality even exists, like in the first place, and then the adaptability of it and how it's evolving. So I want to go, as we kind of begin to wrap up this conversation, I'm definitely going to have you back to do more of a deep dive on drug cartels.
Just one
FYI. Oh, sure.
brief thing that you said, you know, about the kids getting addicted to drugs. We only cared about the addiction when the face of the addict changed.
Yeah.
Because, you know, when black people was on crack in the 80s, nobody cared about them.
Oh, no.
The only rehabilitation they got was incarceration.
Yeah. Now
we want to send everyone to, you know, which is I'm fine with, and it should have been like that for a very long time, but now it's a problem. Now it's a disease.
No, black and brown, it was criminality, but now the white kids are strung on it, and now it's a healthcare crisis.
And the rehabilitation for them was incarceration. These guys were getting 3 to life during those Rockefeller, you know, drug laws. It's insane.
And the minimums. But now we're looking at other alternative treatments and cares because the face have changed.
Which is still being listen, there's selective law enforcement, selective prosecution, and selective incarceration.
Yeah.
So that idea of who we're helping, it's who we're helping. And we're not helping everyone.
No.
Unfortunately.
It's very selective, right? But that's why it's individuals like yourselves who are fighting this fight, right?
Doing the best I can,
individuals like Brian Buckmeyer and Keith White, you know, who are fighting this fight. I don't want to get into your political views, and don't bring up your political views. But as we hear President Trump talk about, building these walls, right, in order to stop these narcotics from entering our borders, right? From your experience, as you've seen the drug cartels being able to adapt, what we just talked about, and adapt to evolve, are these walls stopping these drugs from entering the United States?
It's...
We're talking about adaptability. I mean, these brothers, they're smart down there.
Wasn't the thing that El Chapo most famous for were the tunnels that he was building?
Yeah.
So the wall, why? You need to focus on these tunnels if that's what you really want to do.
Yeah.
But then there's another question: if America really wants to stop the drugs,
well,
there
that is.
Yeah. So I mean, listen, drugs and debt fuel this economy.
Yeah.
So I mean, you need someone that's gonna be doing these drugs.
Yeah.
But that wall, while it may have an effect, it's not gonna have the effect that they're selling to the American people. At least not for the cost that it's costing.
Yeah.
Because again, adaptability. So I can't walk it over the border, then I'll bring it under the border.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll bring it on a boat. I'll bring it through the border, through the border check.
Yeah.
It's always you're never gonna stop the game. The game is the game. You're never gonna stop it. It's just...
I'm just curious. When you are in the rooms with your clients, right? Have they ever brought the wall up? Like, do they kind of chuckle
about that wall,
at that aspect of it?
No, nobody care about that wall.
Yeah.
That's just something for people to talk about on the news.
Yeah.
But the people that are really getting it are always gonna get it.
Yeah.
And they're gonna find a way to make it happen.
Dude, okay, so you're coming back. Now I'm going to do a deep dive into the cartels, but we're going to really pick up where you left off and talk about drugs and debt is what fuels this economy here in the United States of America. Because that is a conversation that I don't think America is just really comfortable in having, right? Because that is the honest truth.
We like drugs in this country. It's a supply and demand, like every single thing. People love your show. You have the demand, so you supply them and you give them what they need. You give them what they want. Americans love to do drugs, so the cartels give them what they want.
Yeah. And also it's a microeconomy, right? From like a justice systems, right? And now we're getting into the trickle-down effects, right? Of the privatization of prisons, right? And making sure we keep those prisons full, right? So individuals can make money off of it, right?
Instead of the education, we're going to, fuel the incarceration instead of the education. And then wonder why the crime rate goes up or wonder why homelessness goes up, because it's like our infrastructure. If you don't invest in it, it's not going to bloom.
Yeah. But it's also because we never look at these scenarios from a human interest perspective, right? We look at criminals from this broad stroke and look at it and then we almost commodify it, right? And then when you look at criminality as a commodity, then you can never really address the heart of the different types of reforms that are needed for criminal justice. And it isn't just a one stroke, right? It's very nuanced. It's very layered, right? It takes a really level of understanding. Lance Clark, I see why you are who you are. I see why you're at the top of your game. You lead a very fascinating life and career. You are really in the belly of the beast, literally and figuratively, within this drug cartel. You are living your own Nino Brown experience. You definitely have to come back, man, to the Mike Muse Show.
Anytime,
brother.
Anytime. It's great.
Ladies and gentlemen, that has been a fantastic conversation that we have had. I can't wait to hear your response on it. Hit me up at I am Mike Muse, MUSSAME. So then, ladies and gentlemen, what a fascinating show this has been. I can't wait to talk to you next time. So until then, peace.
Cash rules everything around me.